Hesterno licini diotiosi, multum lucimus in meis tabellis. All day yesterday, Licinius, we played with poetry, at leisure, since we agreed to be indulgent. Jotting down verses, we fooled around, now in one meter, now in another, giving and taking equally through drunken laughter. 4 years ago, if you'd asked me, "What's your opinion on ancient Rome?" you would have received an enthusiastic answer with ample thought behind it. But how much understanding? How much curiosity? I would have spouted praise for the Romans' beautiful poetry and for their supposedly liberal attitude towards gayness. I would have offered no nuance. I would have been, in a word, wrong. Recently, my fawning over ahistorical notions of dreamy Roman lovers gave way to a startling realization. By valorizing the Romans, I share a tendency with white supremacists, and I really don't want to share any tendencies whatsoever with white supremacists. So, after years of fixation on the eroticism and romance of Latin poetry, the way I think about the quote-unquote queer icons of ancient Rome is long overdue for re-examination. And I left so inflamed by your charm, Licinius, and your wit, that food did not satisfy my love-sick self, nor did sleep settle over my poor eyes, but rather I tossed and turned on my bed, untamable, in a complete frenzy, longing to see daylight, so I could speak and be with you. Romans hardly ever named their poems. As such, translators and scholars usually refer to Latin poems by their author's name and a number according to their estimated chronological order. I've been reading you my translation of Catullus 50. When I translated and analyzed this poem for college, I took the liberty of calling it Separation is Agony. We know of 116 poems written by Catullus, although his actual body of work was certainly larger than the portion that survived. Any discussion of ancient poetry comes with that disclaimer: this is just what survived the violence of history. Nowadays, when I consider the verb survived in the context of history, my mind turns immediately to imperialism. While the Catholic Church conducted meticulous preservation of many Greek and Latin texts, it also perpetuated the destruction of countless texts from the cultures it colonized during the misnamed Age of Discovery. And because so many of those cultures used oral tradition to nurture vast intergenerational repositories of knowledge, loss of human life through colonial genocide also functions as attempted eradication of that knowledge. This is all very History with Critical Thought 101, but I think it's important to emphasize for other white queers who may still have rose-tinted Greco-Roman tunnel vision. We're talking about destruction on the scale of literally countless libraries of Alexandria. Destruction that's ongoing today. Labeling linguistic genocide as past is a tool of white supremacist colonialism. Historically, white imperialism has sought to erase, outlaw, and kill the languages and knowledges of the peoples it subjugates. From the atrocities of the Canadian and American governments separating Indigenous children of many nations from their families and forcibly sending them to abusive residential schools, to English imperialism in India threatening the existence of minority languages, history reveals monolingualism as a genocidal tool. But conceptualizing linguistic genocide as solely historical acquiesces to its presence in the current day. According to Kartik Tripathi, citing David Crystal's book Language Death, of the roughly 6,000 languages that still exist on the planet, between 1/2 and 2/3 are expected to die out by the end of this century. That destruction of minority languages and knowledges is an active process. As Antonia Darder writes in her essay, Mommy, What Did Nana Say? Public Schooling and the Politics of Linguistic Genocide, over recent years, educational policies and corporate entities have moved more aggressively towards linguistic restrictions and constraints with respect to the propagation of minority languages in an effort to protect monolingualism as an imperative of the nation-state. As I began writing this in 2024, the Israeli occupation forces bombed Palestinian universities, schools, holy sites, and libraries, deliberately destroying Palestinian sites of culture and knowledge. Now, as of July 2025, every single university in Gaza has been destroyed by the IOF. Israel also specifically targets and murders Palestinian educators, journalists, and medical workers. As an American, my taxes are directly funding the weapons used to carry out these attacks. We Americans are, right in this moment, witness to, and culpable for, ongoing genocide. Damage to historical texts and memory, either through intentional destruction or incidental loss over time, leaves gaps. Scholars call these lacunas or lacunae. When I was a teen learning to write speculative fiction, a teacher told me that lacuna can be translated as fruitful void. Over a decade later, I know that the word is a diminutive of the Latin word lacus, which, according to the massive Latin dictionary I still own for some reason, means an opening, hollow, lake, pond, or pool of living water. A diminutive is a noun with some sort of deviation from its original form to indicate smaller size, an affectionate attitude, or a demeaning tone. In other words, a diminutive is a modification that diminishes. Examples from English include cigarette from cigar, figurine from figure, and kiddo from kid. So, fruitful void is a very loose, albeit evocative translation. A literal translation of lacuna could be little lake. More accurate translations include pond and ditch, and there are rare examples of Romans using it figuratively to mean loss, void, or want. Imagine how many lacunas imperialism rips in humanity. Enough ponds to fill oceans. Maybe you don't have to imagine it, maybe you live within the gaps. But if you're white like me and privileged in the ways I am, it's possible there was a time you didn't even feel the presence of those oceans in all their infinite absence. That lack of feeling is a violent luxury. It takes just that sort of lack for a person to neglect critical thinking about empire and turn Roman poets into heartthrobs. Afterwards, when my half-dead limbs lay prostrate over the bed, exhausted from their labor, I made this poem for you, darling, so that you may fully appreciate my sorrow. 3 years ago in 2022, I attended a remote PowerPoint party where each attendee presented a slideshow about an obsession of theirs. Mine was on Catullus 50. To illustrate how entrenched I was in my dreamification of Catullus and his bisexuality, as we would call it today, here are some select slides from that presentation. Warning: ancient eroticism incoming. Catullus and Licinius, a love story, or don't listen to heterosexual scholars for the love of... Who were they to each other? Certain historians ask, like, are they friends? But now, I'm less worried about their sanitization of ancient Roman culture, and more worried about mine. As recently as 2023, I learned the term pinkwashing. According to Sarah Youngblood Gregory, writing for Yes magazine, this term was first used by Palestinian journalist Ali Abunimah to describe a trend in how Zionists justify Israel's genocide of Palestinians. Pinkwashing is a tactic used by colonizers to obscure their violent project by claiming that they're spreading gay rights to the cultures they're colonizing. This claim, of course, omits not only the homophobia of the colonizers, but also the existence of queer colonized people. It perpetuates the lie that colonization is not an abhorrent crime against humanity, but a noble mission to spread enlightenment and so-called civilization. See also greenwashing, which is a similar co-opting of environmentalism. I'd argue that pinkwashing is often used as a fresh coat of paint for all sorts of imperialism. If you'd permit me a strange aside, I'd argue that when Tumblr user Umbroni Draws drew this fan art of the musical Hamilton, they were engaging in a form of post hoc pinkwashing. Sorry for the Thomas Jefferson Miku binder jump scare. Although the term pinkwashing is more aptly used to describe a stance taken by governments or political movements, I maintain that when we fixate on dead colonizers' imagined or confirmed queerness, we are pinkwashing on an individual level. We may not do so intentionally, but we do it nonetheless. After all, although Catullus was not a high-ranking politician in the Roman Empire like Jefferson was in colonial America, both men enslaved people. At least we can reasonably surmise Catullus did, as he was born into a wealthy Roman family, and slavery was, to quote Princeton professor Daniel Padilla Peralta, arguably the most ubiquitous feature of the Roman imperial system. Most Latin classes in America downplay the slavery in Roman domestic slavery. The members of a wealthy Roman household, including the enslaved members in early historical periods, were referred to as familia. The head of the household, the master, was referred to as pater familias. According to Seneca the Younger, this term was a deliberate euphemism to mask the true nature of the father's violent power over the family. Big scare quotes. The Roman Empire was, as Padilla describes, a slave regime. While this historical framework often goes overlooked or underemphasized in everyday discussion of the Romans, I cannot discuss Catullus in the context of modern-day pinkwashing without pointing out his status in that regime. Padilla points out that it is possible to read Cato and Plautus against the grain. This means I, as an amateur classicist, a casual studier of Greco-Roman antiquity, must keep context in the foreground while translating and reading Catullus's work. I have certainly lost sight of his context in the past. When initially translating Catullus 50, I delighted in his use of collaborative, poetic creation as metaphor for sex and love. I related it to my own life, how I communicate and express love. The yearning Catullus evokes felt familiar to me, particularly to a past me who had not yet come out as trans. I neglected all context beyond what I brought to the poem from my own life. Back then, translating felt like retracing Catullus's steps, reaching across time to understand the emotions of a queer poet not too unlike myself. Now, I understand I translated irresponsibly. There is a close connection between classics and white supremacy. The professor I quoted earlier, Daniel Padilla Peralta, has been sounding the alarm on this link for years now. His work, which I highly encourage you to seek out, has clearly hit on a truth which rightfully threatens racists in the field. He has weathered public racist comments, including one spurious claim from white classicist Marie Frances Williams during a conference Q&A that Professor Padilla only got his job because he is black. Professor Padilla is Dominican American. Williams said this to his face. Time and again, when white supremacy is challenged, its agents flail and lash out. Professor Padilla has written, "Far from being extrinsic to the study of Greco-Roman antiquity, the production of whiteness turns out, on closer examination, to reside in the very marrows of classics." In her article about Professor Padilla's goal to save classics from whiteness, Rachel Poser writes, "Padilla believes that classics is so entangled with white supremacy as to be inseparable from it." Poser further asserts, Aristotle's belief that some people were slaves by nature was welcomed with special zeal in the American South before the Civil War, which sought to defend slavery in the face of abolitionist critique. In Notes on the State of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson wrote that, despite their condition in life, Rome's enslaved showed themselves to be the rare artists who excelled too at science, insomuch as to be usually employed as tutors to their masters' children. The fact that Africans had not done the same, he argued, proved that the problem was their race. Jefferson's white supremacist stance, of course, ignores the fact that race as a construct operated very differently in ancient Rome than it does in colonial and modern America. Besides, I'm guessing I don't have to debunk his horrific argument for anyone who sought out this video. Both Jefferson and Catullus enslaved people. Both men exist today as useful rhetorical tools for white supremacists. And if Thomas Jefferson Miku Binder typifies pinkwashing within fandom, I must contend with the possibility that my obsession with Catullus as a quote-unquote bisexual icon does too. Which is unacceptable. Now beware foolhardiness, and I beg you, do not spit on my prayers, apple of my eye. The goddess of revenge might claim her due punishment from you. She is a violent deity. Beware offending her. I've used the affectionate English term apple of my eye as a translation of ocelle. That's a diminutive of the word ocellus, meaning eye. When I first translated Catullus 50, that final stanza stuck out. It messed up my fantasy of a comforting, beautiful, gay romance between two poets. In the last lines of this poem, Catullus shows his true colors. Fearing rejection, he threatens Licinius with divine retribution. At best, this reads as jealous insecurity. At worst, it reads as a disregard for Licinius's consent. She is a violent deity. Beware offending her. I used to minimize the significance of lines 18 through 21. Without any acknowledgement of dissonance, when analyzing my favorite Latin poem, I brushed past the part I found off-putting and morally questionable. I'm just now realizing that, for years, I brushed past the inconvenient parts of the entire Roman Empire. I substituted the word Romans with a secret, silent diminutive in my mind. I've been diminishing them. Not pejoratively, but adoringly. Rendering them cute and small and harmless. That diminishment ignores the ancient Romans' enforcement of a slave regime and other past violence, and it also misses the way current-day white supremacists use the Roman Empire as a tool for their own violence. Donna Zuckerberg, author of Not All Dead White Men, Classics and Misogyny in the Digital Age, said in conversation with Vox's Sean Illing, Western civilization has, for the alt-right, become culturally acceptable code for white culture. So celebration of Western civilization is really a way to celebrate the cultural achievements of white men. They see ancient Greece and Rome as a starting point for this imagined idea of Western civilization, and later it evolves to include Christianity in the medieval period. When claiming that Western civilization, meaning so-called white culture, began with ancient Greece and Rome, the alt-right ignores the fact that the way we think about race today is extremely different from how it was thought of in ancient Greece and Rome. While xenophobia certainly fueled both ancient empires, whiteness as a concept didn't exist, and was only developed relatively recently as a category designed to exclude. White supremacists and the alt-right, two groups with a lot of overlap, perhaps even two synonymous groups, use this Western civilization narrative to confirm their own pre-existing ideas about race and gender. In other words, they mythologize and idolize ancient Greece and Rome to fit their purposes, falsely legitimizing their worldview, fear-mongering about the decline of Western civilization, and glorifying warped notions of stoic masculinity. Now, Zuckerberg also points out that these ancient societies were very patriarchal, and misogynistic ideas can be found in many canonical texts from ancient literature. But unlike those of us who believe we can do better than that, the alt-right points to ancient Greek and Roman patriarchy and says, look, the bastion of Western civilization did it this way, and we must uphold those values. I fear I perform a similar maneuver when I perceive queerness in Catullus and uncritically use his work as a lens through which to view my own queerness. In the past, When I claimed that great queer representation could be found in the work of Catullus, I ignored the fact that the way we think about queerness today is extremely different from how it was thought of in ancient Greece and Rome. I have too often pointed at men-loving men in ancient Rome and said something which implied, "Look, the bastion of Western civilization did it this way, and we must uphold those values." Now, I feel an imperative to question that parallel. Rachel Poser writes that, over the centuries, thinkers as disparate as John Adams and Simone Weil have likened classical antiquity to a mirror. And as Poser points out, that mirror can glimmer and harm in equal measure. Donna Zuckerberg states that the discipline of classics is currently undergoing a painful reckoning, as classicists try to confront our own complicity and make the study of classics not just a discipline where white men see their values reflected back at them. When I look at ancient Rome, what I take away is reflective of my own whiteness and queerness. If I see only adoration, devoid of nuance or historical context or liberatory thinking, I do not like what I see. I agree with Padilla's critique of classics as a field. We must break the mirror. We cannot see the Romans clearly through reflective glass. I titled this essay Ecce Catullus. Ecce is an imperative verb, instructing the listener to look. Look at Catullus. See him for what he was. A poet, yes, but also an enslaver. And, judging by lines 18 through 21 and some of his other surviving poems, an angry, entitled man. I do not need him as a reminder that queer people have always been here. We have always been here, regardless. So, look at Catullus. Then, most importantly, look beyond, at what is missing, at the lacunas, beneath the surface, behind the mirror, against the grain, whatever metaphor helps you. Ecce.